joined by the Mail's Andrew Pearce, the Mirror's Kevin Maguire, and live from Kyiv, journalist Oz Katerji. Oz, this time yesterday we were reporting on this gigantic convoy of armoured Russian vehicles inching its way towards Kyiv. Do you know how close they are and how that is affecting people there? Are people fleeing in huge numbers, or are they resolute and determined to stay and fight it out?
So, two things there. One, about people fleeing, is that most of the routes out of the city are closed now. I understand some trains have been in operation, but they're very, very full, very oversubscribed for people trying to get out. So a lot of people are trapped here. Potentially millions of people are trapped here, spending the night in bunkers and underground train stations. The second thing you say is, it's my understanding, and it's hard to tell because it's still very early here. It's my understanding that this tank column hasn't made significant progress towards Kyiv. So Kyiv is very heavily defended. It's very heavily fortified. Its streets are blocked, barricaded. There are civilians, volunteers who have joined militias, who are armed. The government has handed them anti-tank munitions and small arms to repel the invaders. So we're in a place where we haven't seen the tank column. Tank column hasn't arrived at the city yet, but there are bigger, more pressing concerns to the people of Kyiv, and those are the food and supply and resource situation, which is getting critical, and the mass bombardment. What this city is afraid of most is being bombarded from the sky by Vladimir Putin. It's less that the tanks are going to struggle to get through Kyiv's streets, struggle to get past the barricades that are in place for them. So yesterday, Putin bombed a TV tower in the center of Kyiv, and he also damaged the Holocaust memorial site, Babin Yar, in central Kyiv. This is a war that is so far focusing most of its fire on civilian targets and civilian infrastructure, and that's the bigger concern. That what happens when Putin's tank column doesn't make the progress that he's expecting it to. And it won't, because the city is too heavily defended. The people here are too resolute, and they're too ready to fight them off. So it's bombardment and starvation that are the bigger concerns right now.
Oz, can you explain or help us, really give us some sense of the morale of the people of Kyiv right now?
So one thing that I think is fascinating about the human mind is how quick it gets accustomed to war. Yesterday, I was out when I heard the explosion at the TV tower. There were two old ladies walking out of a shop with their 2 full bags of rations. And when the explosion happens, the loudest explosion I've heard in Kyiv so far, as you can see on your screens, it's very, very, very big and large explosion that was echoed across Kyiv. These 2 old ladies, they didn't even flinch. They didn't move. They didn't react at all to the explosion. I think people who come under this sort of situation start getting accustomed very quickly to what it's about. That's terrifying. That's depressing. It's a tragedy, but it is what it is. It's been a couple of days since I was last on a front line, but the men and women that I was with at that front line, they do have high morale. Their spirits are high. They believe they can defend their city. They need support. They need international support to do so. But if it's a question of, do they have morale? Yeah, they do. They're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for the future of their children. It's a completely different equation to the one made by Russian invaders who are being confronted by people. They're being confronted by soldiers. They're being confronted by farmers. They're being confronted by everyone here because they're a fascist invasion force, and the people of this country will do everything within their power to repel this invasion.
Yeah, we've seen civilians making Molotov cocktails, haven't we, in order to defend themselves, and people saying that they will take up arms. Oz, stay with us. Just want to bring in Andrew and Kevin. We feel a chill when we see that convoy approaching Kyiv. But as Oz says, if that doesn't successfully get to the city, the outcome could be worse. Aerial bombardment and besieging the city and inflicting starvation on the people.
It's the old medieval siege tactic. You surround an area, you try to starve people out, no water, electricity may be cut, fuel goes, and people go hungry. And at the same time, you don't have to send tanks through. You can shell from the air, as we've just heard. And Putin is just absolutely brutal. There's no humanity in him. And it's the challenge then, of course, is for other countries, including our own, and NATO, is what do you do? Because sanctions will take some time to bite. There is no doubt that damage inflicted on the Putin war machine will have an impact. Ordinary Russians will turn against him at some point, and even the oligarchs who can see their own vested financial interests being attacked. But how long does that take, and how long does Kyiv and its people have?
Andrew, we saw yesterday Boris Johnson being robustly challenged by a very emotional activist yesterday, Daria Kalinyuk, saying you have to do more. You're worried about sparking World War III because you might intervene militarily, but actually it's already started.
And she was arguing for a no-fly zone. If there is a no-fly zone, and I understand why they want it, it means that effectively we'll be shooting down, NATO forces will be shooting down Russian planes. Then we do have World War III, and that's not what anybody wants. Nobody wants this to happen to Kyiv at all, but it raises the spectre dramatically of then a nuclear conflagration. But you know what struck me most about listening to your guest? This is 2 hours away from Britain. I was just listening to him, I thought, God, this is 2 hours away. This is not as far as sometimes we go for our summer holiday, and this is happening on our doorstep. It's so shocking.
Oz, I wonder what the reaction of people in Kyiv that you've spoken to is to this determination by the UK, NATO allies, not to introduce that no-fly zone at the point where, as you say, aerial bombardment is an imminent possibility.
So I have to say that the talk of a no-fly zone is deeply frustrating as someone that's covered the Syrian civil war for over 10 years. There is a complete misunderstanding about what a no-fly zone is. It doesn't require engagement over the skies of Kyiv. There are deter and retaliate options. These are not comfortable options for the West to hear. But I need to make something very clear. The moment we started sending weapons to Ukraine, we became a party to this conflict. We are a party to this conflict. America's a party to this conflict. We're supplying the Ukrainian people with guns, with weapons. That makes us a party to this conflict. I understand the need to avoid turning this into a wider world war. This is something that we all empathize with. No one wants a world war. And who wakes up in the morning and says, yeah, you know what I want is a world war. But hundreds of thousands of Syrian people have been murdered. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian people have been murdered. It's part of the same war that's been going on for over 8 years. Russia's war against civilians, against democracy, against any country that wants to break free from totalitarianism. You'll find Russian mercenaries there propping up the state. This is Putin's plan, a global alliance of tyranny, of mass murder. So, yeah, the other thing I will say about the no-fly zone is a retaliate strategy in which if you take your flights, you fly sorties from airfields, those airfields are then cratered, right? So you have to fix the airfield before you can fly again. Look, these are not attractive options for anyone in the UK. No one wants to hear this right now. No one wants to hear it. But from my perspective, again, we watched hundreds of thousands of Syrians being murdered, and the answer was we can't do anything because if we do, we'll fight Russia in the skies and we've got World War III, right? Every single time, are we just going to keep moving that line? Oh, we can't defend Ukraine. We can't defend Finland. We can't defend the Baltics because it's going to be World War III. Where does the line stop? Seriously, people need to ask themselves this question because if the idea is that, well, Russia's a nuclear armed state, so therefore it can invade its neighbors with impunity, and there will be no military confrontation ever, no matter how far that line goes. I think we're lost. I think we're lost if that's the case. You know, a lot of people bringing up analogies with World War II, and people view World War II primarily, and it's quite right, they do so primarily through the lens of the Holocaust. But the reason Britain intervened in World War II was because Hitler invaded Poland, right? That was the line in the sand that they drew. Eventually, Western capitals need to talk very seriously about the line in the sand. They're saying it's the Baltic states, right? NATO. Obviously, NATO's alliance has to hold. NATO's signatory Article 5 has to hold. But if you think Putin has any intention of stopping Ukraine, then you haven't been paying attention to anything he's done in Georgia, in Chechnya, in Syria, in Crimea, now in Ukraine. This is part of a pattern, and that pattern's not going to stop until it's stopped. He has to be stopped.
Okay. Let's just have a listen to what Boris Johnson said addressing this specific question from Daria Kalenyuk yesterday.
Oz, I'm not sure if you can hear me. First of all, I think a number of people will be nodding in strong agreement with everything that you had to say. Two questions. Firstly, in terms of a no-fly zone, one asked a question about why, for example, you couldn't create a safe fly space, at least in the west of Ukraine, to allow women and children to escape to live for some semblance of safety. And while we have you here, a second question is that President Zelensky stood up very powerfully and asked for immediate membership of the EU. You talked about our defence of Poland in 1939. That's because we had an international legal obligation, a treaty with that country. No agreement exists for us to intervene in Ukraine. Isn't it time, you may argue, that Ukraine joined the EU, and that would at least trigger our joint defence obligations?
So, yeah, a couple of points about that. One, I think it's a really good idea that Ukraine is joining the EU and that it's ratified immediately. And the biggest reason I have for that is refugee flows. We need these people to be given safety, and if they have freedom of movement across Europe, they will be able to find that safety. It's vitally important that we care right now for the people of Ukraine who are fleeing this war. The second thing I will say, and these were statements echoed by former President Petro Poroshenko yesterday, is that no-fly zone doesn't necessarily have to be, again, no-fly zone is more of a concept. It's not one specific military strategy. There are several military strategies that can be employed to create a no-fly zone. Petro Poroshenko asked for the West and the EU to send anti-aircraft missiles, anti-aircraft batteries, and jet fighters. This is what they want. They want to defend their own skies, right? Give the Ukrainian people, give the Ukrainian Air Force the chance and the ability to defend their own skies. We owe them that. The second point that I'm going to raise about this is the humanitarian situation here. We're reaching a point in Kyiv, if we're besieged, with food supplies are already running critically low. If we're besieged, we are going to have to start talking seriously about aid drops as the only way to feed people in this city, because Vladimir Putin, as your guests have mentioned, intends to starve this city, to break this city, to humiliate and destroy the population of this city, right? That's his goal. And if the only way to feed 3 million people that are left trapped in this city is to airdrop food to them, then we're going to reach a position where Putin is going to try and shoot those jets, those planes trying to drop the aid out of the sky. At that point, Britain and the West needs to ask itself how far they're willing to go to when they watch 3 million people starve. That's the reality of what's going to happen here. We're going to be starved and bombed and besieged. And we need to start reacting to how that's going to play out now. We need plans in place. We can't just keep having this debate back and forth.
Of course. Oz Katerji, we appreciate your time this morning, and honestly, stay safe. You know, good luck to everyone there in Kyiv. It's as much as we can say. I feel helpless listening to you.